Hello, dear class. Just a little video to encourage you on in your quiz about the Martin McDonagh play, The Pillowman. Some of you have already completed your quiz. I guess perhaps those of you who are most enthusiastic about the play. If I was left a bit bewildered by the play, I'm not sure how much of a hurry I would be in to complete the quiz. And if you are bewildered, I will be most sympathetic, I can assure you. Some people are not bewildered at all by it, but McDonagh, as those of you who've seen various of his movies will know, is a master of the dark twist. It's really his stock in trade, and he may have fully discovered it for the first time in The Pillowman, although he'd written a number of marvelous plays before it. But this one really did so many surprising things, made so many surprising and shocking moves that he must have felt himself at freedom as in no previous landscape to let the play find its own horrific stories. And of course, it's a play that's devoted to the idea of making stories as well as to making its own story. So the world of the Pillowman, I had sort of intended to ask you what you thought of, even to say to you, where is this taking place, do you suppose? And if you felt obliged to say it was taking place in a particular country, which you would be under no obligation to assume, especially with the names having a ring of Vladimir and Estragon in Waiting for Godot. In some ways, I'm not sure where Beckett himself took those interestingly ambiguous names as far as cultural background, historical background, geographical background are concerned, deliberately to render them universal. And that seems to have been a conscious or unconscious inspiration for McDonagh. That names like Tupolsky, Michal, Ariel, a common Israeli name for a man, and Katurian sound somewhat Eastern European, and Tupolsky with that traditional Polish SKI ending, but clearly we're not in Poland or any specific place. We're in a foreign place which could be our own place. And in fact, as soon as you open on a police interrogation, we are all there. There can be few people who do not identify at all with someone being interrogated who says, but what have I done? I haven't done anything. I think most people throughout history, probably not just now, have always felt that they were about to be carted off to a police station and interrogated and accused of a crime that, as far as they know, they never committed. And as far as we know, at the beginning of the play, Katurian hasn't done anything. As the play goes on, we discover that indeed he has. And he himself discovers, to his horror, that his brother has committed precisely the crimes that he, Katurian, has dreamt up for his gruesome stories, thereby giving us perhaps the idea that gruesome stories, Grimm's fairy tales and so on, in some perhaps already unstable, retarded, deluded minds might trigger an impulse to do it. We can't be responsible, I guess, as writers, for what a description of the horrible things that human beings do will trigger in some minds. if we were to be made responsible, we would have to write some very bland and anodyne stories, which gave a very rose-tinted vision of human nature, and would not be interesting at all. Would certainly never have been interesting to the Greeks, with whom we began this class, who felt that the function of narrative art was precisely to plumb down into the worst. And I think MacDonagh must be well aware of that fact, in order for the participants, the audience, to confront in themselves what is, I think, to some extent in everybody or in most people, the horrors that we have in us, the horrors of the human heart. So in this play, it was possible for MacDonagh to reach across the centuries to Greek drama. Whether that makes it, in Aristotelian terms, a tragedy, I'm not sure. So far from the quiz answers I've received, I get the sense that you're inclined to see it as a tragedy, although whose tragedy is a more complex issue. It doesn't only have to be one person's tragedy. We've seen that in Shakespearean tragedy, where certainly in Macbeth it's two people's tragedy, even perhaps in Othello. So I had thought of asking you that, but it comes up in your answers anyway. MacDonagh went on to write for the movies. I'm not surprised, because it's not that the movies are a higher calling or more interesting, although they're a higher calling in terms of the money you're going to make out of it. And they are more interesting for, I would think, most writers. I know some devoted playwrights who have no great interest in writing for the movies, just as I know a few great actors who have no great interest in appearing in the movies, but they are few. The movies in our day is the magnet. That's the world that draws us all, and I guess the money to be made there is a huge factor. If you take that away, and people got paid as well for appearing in the theatre as they do for appearing on screen, I think an awful lot more people would never leave the theatre, which many actors feel, even those who have moved on to screen stardom. Many actors feel that that is their real and original home, is theatre. Almost all actors start with theatre, not all by any means. Today it's quite possible to go straight to the movies without an old-fashioned theatrical training or without time spent in the theatre. But I would say the great majority of actors still begin in the theatre, and for them it is in many ways home. It's hard to feel that the movies are home as an actor. The experience of making a movie is so disconnected and so lacking in the organic feeling of giving a performance over a couple of hours or more in a theatre, in which you can mount a continuous performance. Not always, of course, and indeed actors who play King Lear will tell you that King Lear for them is a play of a series of scenes in which as Lear they are relatively different people, as people in truth are. But it's still in its own way an organic whole, compared to making a movie in which you might have a couple of lines to say and then have to rest for a couple of weeks. Not go away and lie down. Well, depends what those lines are, but in which there might be a break in shooting, and you are not absolutely sure when you come back, who was I? What's this part? How did I play this character? So it's hard for any actor to feel that's really home, although some love the camera as the camera indeed loves them and gives them an opportunity to do things which they will feel cannot be seen on a stage as clearly. So McDonough has, by and large, moved on. I felt when I first read The Pillowman, my first thought was, oh God, where'd you go now? It seemed to me a masterpiece at a pitch which very hard to follow. And as a writer, all writers must be envious in some degree of The Pillowman and wonder on behalf of the author, boy, how do you follow that? And, the sensible thing is don't try. It really is the peak of McDonough's art as a storyteller in many ways, even though he has written wonderful things for the movies. And In Bruges, a film that he wrote, is in some ways my favorite of all his works. I'm sorry, that's me bumping into my laptop on which my phone sits. I apologize. It's my favorite of his. And but he seems to be pretty happy working in movies, making movies, and there's a spread of what you can do and what you can control if you're a movie maker, which doesn't apply to your life as a playwright. And perhaps he may come back to the theatre, but it's hard to know how you would top The Pillowman. I was so struck by it when I first read it. Subsequent readings have not sustained the fascination, I have to report. So any of you who are not quite as impressed as I'm implying you should be, maybe you're just quicker off the mark than I am. It's not that I now know the story, because I kind of forget the story when there are a few years in between readings of it or teachings of it. But somehow the thing has a horrifying grip on you the first time you read it, because you have no idea where it might go and where it might take your sympathies, what it might do to you. You feel most terrifyingly threatened, not knowing who to side with. You feel sorry for Michal, the brother, only to discover that he's actually a multiple murderer, and Katurian, who perhaps very understandably killed his parents, as one might wish to do if one were him. He's so obsessed with the survival of his stories, regardless, whatever it costs, that he, in some ways, is a model of what one hopes not to be as a writer, as important as one may feel one's work to be. And I certainly do. My work next to my children is the thing dearest and nearest to me, but one should not make them more important. I mean, I wouldn't know how to do it than living persons. However many living persons one's work might in theory affect, nevertheless, we live once, and in that life have a chance to do right by human beings. And even if your work, your written work, your fictions are wonderful, there will be other fictions. Other people will write no less wonderful fictions. And to privilege one's own above human beings is really a kind of repulsive mistake, although an understandable one in writers. So I think, and one of the more interesting things the play offers is the movement and sympathy one has, having found Ariel a bit terrifying right at the beginning when we identify with Katurian as a man wrongly accused. And as we discover that it isn't as simple as that, Ariel himself becomes the more sympathetic of the two between himself and Tupolsky. And I think that remains with me a very interesting development of the play. But I'm fascinated to see what you have to say about it. Thank you for reading it. I hope you feel it was a worthwhile and interesting choice. And I will very soon find us our next port of call in our journey into the legacy of tragedy. We'll hark back again to Aristotle before we're done. Thank you very much. Please be safe and stay well. Thank you. Bye.